Well,
It's a little like Indian cats.
yeah, well, I've tried that too for a lot of years.
Jessica's crystal and said, "The Lord be with you." And then that gets.
Yeah.
He has a phone for me. I can hardly wait.
Well, and I just brought all of them, you can decide what you want to do.
That's my nickname for my wife, Shortbread. When she asks me to come and read something for her. Okay, good to see everybody here this evening. When we walked in, the sun was shining. When we walk out, it may or may not be. We'll see. First, a question, order of business kind of question. Julie and I were looking at the weather for this coming Saturday out in West Glacier anyway. And quite naturally, the conversation came up. Should we try to postpone this a week and hope for better weather? You know, there's no guarantee, obviously. So we decided to raise the question here. I think we have about 20 signed up to come. And we can, if it works better for most people or everybody, we can keep this coming Saturday. But we may be inside, 20 plus of us. An ideal situation would be if the weather is warm enough and there's not wind or rain, people can be on the deck or inside. So, if
like a binary situation.
so what we'll do is we'll meet on a Tuesday following. No, we'll be in the middle somewhere.
And it could be next Friday.
It could be either Friday the 22nd or Saturday the 23rd at 4 in the afternoon.
Memorial weekend, right?
It is. Do you have any wisdom or guidance for us on this here?
Memorial weekend is the following.
No.
No, not this year.
Yeah, Memorial is a little early this year, so that Friday would be the front end of the Memorial Day weekend. Saturday would be part of the weekend.
So it is expected to be rather drizzly
This coming
week.
Well, the last time I checked mine was like the temperature was like 57 and 60% chance of showers during the day. And, 50s is a little bit chilly to be out on the deck and kind of sitting around. If you're working, it's not bad. But we could come and have a work party at our place too, I suppose.
I have a better address.
So, do you want us to make an executive decision, Julie and me, to make an executive decision?
Yes.
Anybody who absolutely can't come a week later? Gail? Doesn't work for you.
It doesn't work, so somebody could give them, right? I'll be at Tally Lake.
Ah, okay. Would that be true on Friday or Saturday?
We go out on Thursday. We probably don't, but we go out on Friday.
Cold to go to
But somebody could probably take Bev.
We could get Bev out there one way or another, I'm sure.
And Mike Connor is coming.
BJ, could you?
And so maybe Mike
Well, we'll figure that out. We can figure that out.
Could I ask a silly question? If you don't do it this Saturday, since we're used to coming on Wednesday night, next Wednesday doesn't work for you guys?
We have company
Oh, okay.
from out of
That's
town.
a good reason, that's a very good reason. I was just, we were already used to meeting on Wednesday.
Well, I mean, they're really nice people. If
If
you-
Wednesday's better for everybody, they'd adjust. They'd adjust.
I mean, they are, she is a college classmate of ours from Spokane. Her husband is an ex-Jesuit, come Lutheran, and a delightful human being.
No, I didn't want to interfere with your company. I just was thinking that, everybody's kind of used to being out on Wednesday night for the last 4 weeks.
Maybe just look at the weather
And see
do what's best for you, and we'll, as many of us can come, will come.
Okay. Carol and Steve, would Wednesday work for you, or Friday, or Saturday?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes, 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 okay. Jude, do you have
Yeah.
everybody's email?
Well, I'm sure I know how to get a hold of everybody, but why don't you pass this around again? And
Just put your email down, okay? So we don't have to look them.
I know how to find everybody.
I know you can find it, but it's easy if you have it on a sheet. Okay.
So he's an Augustinian, it'd be a lot easier, but he's Jesuit, right?
Well, as Jack says, he was a Jesuit for 10 years. And it came to an end and he and Jen were married, have a lovely family, and periodically we get together. And they're coming over on Monday and going to stay until Thursday. So if it's Wednesday, they will be there. We're not asking them, we're telling them it will happen. We'll check as we get a little closer and the forecast out for the week, if we can see a better day in there. But it won't be this Saturday, okay? Just count on that. Okay? And Bev, however it works, BJ, no, you need a ride. Bev, we'll work it out, so you have a ride. And anybody else need rides? Okay. This is the last of our 4 sessions, and we want to finish this up, and as we shall do. I'd like to tonight think about some other polarities that over time have become maybe more important to me. Maybe they're a bit idiosyncratic, less perhaps deeply rooted in the Lutheran and Protestant traditions. I want to think about biblical text and biblical interpreter. Not biblical text or a biblical interpreter, but and think about that a little bit with you. Second of all, this whole business of certainty and doubt, faith and uncertainty, again, it's not faith or doubt or uncertainty, but somehow or another they're entangled for most of us. And then think a little bit about truth. Truth is singular, and I would say, and plural. And to me, this is important, and it has become increasingly important as I think not only ecumenically, but interfaith, in terms of interfaith issues. In other words, I don't consider myself a hard and fast sectarian. I got the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. That means if you don't agree with me, you don't have it. And that's not how I look at this. And finally, this business, and again, I don't think this is just an or issue, but I suppose as many of you, I have, lo these many years that I've been on this planet and been kind of adult enough to think about these kinds of issues, have had a winding journey with regard to Lutheranism itself. And there have been periods when I thought, well, that was great in the 16th century, but I think we've probably moved on. And then there are other times I think, no, we can't just sort of recreate the 16th century, but there are things there that do work and apply to the 21st as well. And again, I don't think it's just Lutheran things. I think it is, there are a whole host of denominations that sort of fit under this umbrella. In other words, I had become increasingly taken with Lutheranism as a confessional church and not merely, or maybe even at all, a dogmatic church. And I use dogmatic in a rather, perhaps, negative sense. I do think, and we can think about this, what is the difference? And maybe there should be an and, confessional church, and a teaching or dogmatic church. Well, we'll think about that a little bit. Then when we finish that, I want to just present to you, as I said the other day, in conclusion, a piece I put together years and years ago, and it was published in Christian Century, on the Tower of Babel story. And then the bookend. We began 4 sessions ago with Avi Schwartz's Sounds of Silence. And what I'd like to do is just have us reflect in silence for 2 or 3 minutes about what we have been thinking about here in terms of these polarities that are at work in our lives just because we are alive, and they're at work in the Christian traditions with which we are familiar, and how we might think of these polarities and this faithful middle, as I've termed it here, maybe even in some cases radical middle, helps us forestall extremism on either side of this, where there are some pretty negative consequences. Okay, that's what we're going to do tonight, this evening. And we shall start off, okay? Some people might say, well, what's the big deal? What's the big difficulty of just reading the Bible? Well, I don't think there's any real difficulty with that. But I think it does behoove us to think sort of conceptually about how we might think about reading biblical texts, sacred texts. My own view is that two things come together. The biblical text on the one hand, and the biblical reader or interpreter on the other. And what that means then is that meaning is found in the encounter between the two. A text, an interpreter, a reader, and I have used the metaphor sometimes of a conversation between the text and the interpreter. Now, what that means is that meaning is not just found in the biblical text. It's not found simply in the mind of the interpreter or reader. It's in the encounter between the two. And we all know of people who are really good conversationalists. They engage their conversation partners effectively. And many, as they say, we have 2 ears for a reason and 1 mouth. People listen. They speak, but they listen. And there's engagement, and the conversation can be almost generative, shall we say, in those kinds of things. And I know it's a metaphor, but metaphors are helpful in causing us to think about how we might read, engage, interpret a sacred text such as the Christian Bible or the Jewish Bible or any other sacred text for that matter. What that means is, I think, that we have to be cognizant of who we are and where we are at any given moment when we engage those biblical texts. If you are in a hospital bed and you have been given some difficult medical news, and you pick up the Bible and you begin, or the pastor shows up and reads, and you engage a biblical text in a particular context in which you find yourself. Now, if you're in an academic seminar and you're reading the text, you're coming to this conversation in a very different way. And it may mean that you ask, it will mean that you ask different questions. And again, I think the way we generate questions, meaningful questions, productive questions, good questions, is critically important. Not only when we speak to somebody else and they speak with us in a conversation, but the way we have a conversation with these biblical texts. In other words, if the meaning of the text simply is seated in a written text or in a digitalized form of a written text, then your goal is to try to find the needle of truth in that text.
Because the truth changes.
It does, doesn't it, Linda? It does, yeah. Now, on the other extreme, can the text mean whatever under the sun I might want it to mean?
No.
Not for me, Steve. Not for you either, apparently. If it were the case, it would cease to be a conversation. It would be a fictional activity, maybe creative, maybe interesting in some way, at least to me or to any other reader. But we have to think about what the implication of that is. Then the whole conversation is in the extreme relativistic. The whole encounter means whatever I want it to mean. Again, it might be creative and interesting, but is it a conversation with a partner? Maybe not. So, here we are, trying to discern. Bev's going to read it tonight or in the morning out of her context. Linda's going to read it out of her context, and Bob's going to read it out of his. Kathy's going to read it from hers, all the rest of us. That's good. So how do I keep it, in my own mind anyway, from simply becoming a relativistic exercise about what I want the text to mean? Well, I have a kind of fancy term. I think, at least conceptually, that in that conversation there is a circle of plausibility within which we work. There are certain things a text cannot mean. But there are many things that it may mean. And that circle of plausibility is never fixed. Hard and fast, set in concrete. If you look at the history of biblical interpretation from over the last 2,000 years, you will see that there were things that were considered outside the circle of plausibility that all down through the centuries become to be rather normative, if not orthodox. So, are you with me so far here? Does this make any sense? Examples of what in particular?
Of things that gain plausibility.
Well, okay. I mean, if we just go back to the 16th century, Luther had a context, of course, and it had to do with certain practices in the church that he abhorred. And he had a laser focus on certain things having to do with righteousness by grace through faith that seemed to be beyond certain circles in the medieval Roman church. Centuries later, when you look and you read the materials that the Lutherans and Catholics put together on justification by faith or righteousness by grace through faith, there didn't seem to be that much room between them on many points. I taught for 20 years with a Benedictine sister from the Midwest, and she said, we Catholics in the Midwest have had to take Lutherans very, very seriously. There are just too many of you for us to ignore. So, there were certain notions of grace, faith, and so on. That doesn't mean Catholics and Protestants don't disagree today about certain issues, but a whole emphasis came into play that you can find not just in Lutherans, but I studied with Presbyterians, Reformed folks, for a while. They were using the same doggone language that I grew up with thinking about in a Lutheran seminary. And I have been in situations where Catholics talk the same thing. Now, they may have an ecclesiology that's different than ours. Am I making any progress on this one, Linda, in terms of what may have been outside late medieval Catholic theology really had an impact more broadly once Luther and other reformers?
Are you saying that things that, beliefs that we use to define ourselves can be found in other traditions?
Oh, I think, I not only would say that, I would affirm that, adamantly. When Julie and I were in Morocco in the fall, we had dinner with a Moroccan Muslim, they're Sunnis, family. It was very engaging. But it occurred to me when they were talking about their practices and we were talking about ours, and there happened to be an Episcopal priest in our group as well. That we cannot, in this pluralistic world, merely tolerate each other. That sounds like we just put up with difference. We need to engage and learn from difference. And I think that's what ecumenical with a big E means. And it may be across traditional religious or interreligious lines.
In Mexico, I wanted to play the organ in a Catholic church, and I was referred to a particular priest who had to say whether or not I could do that. And I went to see him, and he said, "Are you Catholic?" And I said, "I am Lutheran." And he said, "Oh, Luther, we should have listened to him in the first place."
Yeah. Okay, just take this one step further. When we first went to Portland, the suburb of Beaverton, the closest church to us that had anything to do with Lutherans was about 2 miles away, and we went there. It was a Lutheran Catholic parish. Now, at first, I don't think it was really quite what I thought that meant, that there were just Catholics dropping in here and there. I think they were interfaith families to a large extent. But here, speaking about playing, we went one Sunday, and the traditional organist wasn't there. There was a man, a Sikh by religion, with his turban, playing the organ. Very well, I might add. Okay? This all made the local Catholic bishop very, very nervous. Not only having Sikhs around, but having Lutherans too close. But what they did, as long as they could get away with it, they had a semi-retired Catholic priest, a Lutheran pastor full-time, and
Who was later elected
bishop of the Oregon Synod of the ELCA. Yeah, she's from Libby, Montana. And lo and behold, they'd have communion every Sunday. And I think I've got this right, Ju. For 3 Sundays, the Catholic priest and the Lutheran would say parts of the words of institution together. They may break up and take communion in separate rooms, and on the 4th Sunday, they gathered together. You know, they were finessing some things here, but coming back to your point, that this isn't defiling somehow our purity. And not just to tolerate each other, but to affirm we need the other. Whether that be Catholic, Lutheran, Protestant, Methodist, Episcopal, or Sunni Muslim. David?
Many of us would probably remember Rabbi Alan Satcher. Now I live in Chicago, but he spent 20-plus years in Chicago before moving here to the Valley and doing the Jewish community here in the Valley. And he, in Chicago, he worked directly with a Catholic priest because we live in a diversified, pluralistic society. They were dealing with intermarriage, and so they would do catechetics and the Jewish ritual of adulthood together, and they would share those things with the family, and it's quite a beautiful history.
Yeah.
That was just because this is the reality.
Yeah, I think that's right. I do think it's the case that in the Christian Jewish that we have to be sensitive to the fact that Christians outnumber Jews, and in an intermarriage situation, the couple might become Christian, and that is more of a threat to the Jewish community than it would be to a Christian. But we can be sensitive to that reality. Okay. We could talk about this all night, I suspect. So let's think about certainty and doubt, or faith and uncertainty. I used to think, when I heard the word agnostic, that was a bad thing. Agnostic, gnosis. Basically, in English, we don't know. We're not sure. Well, I have spent much of my life increasingly agnostic about things. And
That's called maturity.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope it is. But whatever anybody wants to call it, it's my case, the case in my life. And I'm not alone in this room, I will bet you. And I'm not really a gambling man, but I would bet you that. And in many ways, doubt and uncertainty can be a constructive part of one's life, because it generates, coming back to our thing, questions. Where the question in many ways is more important than a simple answer. I would also say, in my case, maybe in yours as well, that as time has gone on, that when I was in my 20s and becoming very serious about studying these traditions and these texts and so on and so forth, that there were certain questions that really tormented me. As maybe a little more maturity has accrued along the way, I don't think those questions ever got resolved in a simple answer way, but they, in many cases, became less urgent. And new questions emerged, so it wasn't just this question drives me crazy, torments me from day one till today. Maybe that's true with some people. But though there's been an evolution, at least in my case, about those kinds of doubt, faith questions, and I've said this to you before. When the movie first came out, Conclave, that statement by the Archbishop Lawrence presiding over the conclave, certainty is the fatal sin. And if you remember watching it, that whole episode took some very curvy twists and turns. And so we end up, about a year ago, with Pope Leo. I heard something kind of cute the other day about him trying to get a bank account attended to in Chicago that he'd had for a long time. Some of the rest of you heard that too? He calls up the bank and uses his given name, his family name, and he's trying to work, but he wasn't getting, the person things weren't really working out, and finally somebody got on the line and said to her, "You are speaking with him from Rome, and it's the Pope," and she hung up. I've heard some good ones, but this takes the cake. And of course, he was probably speaking with a Chicago accent, but pretty American, And so, again, one can only imagine that process in a conclave. I'm sure it's political in one sense. I'm sure it's this in another sense. Julie and I stayed, I guess the last time we were in Rome, in a Catholic guest house in Rome. And it is the same guest house where Pope Francis stayed when he was attending the conclave when he was elected and announced as the Pope. Rather pleasant place, actually. June?
I often chafe even at the creeds because I know the intent is to sort of nail down what we believe and how we believe it, etc. And I don't want to be disrespectful of all of those men who wrote the creeds, because that's who they were. But it seems to me I long for, in the church, a sense of the ludicrousness, if that's a word, of defining God and of trying to nail down doctrine and dogma and creeds that, yes, are meant to be guides, but not, the truth handed down somehow from up there somewhere. But rather a church that wrestles with questions that...
That's the next point, Jew. Questions and answers.
Yeah. No, really, how ludicrous of us to think that we are going to define God. And that's one thing that I always wrestle with. Another thing that I wrestle with a lot is the fact that women were so excluded from recording it from the canon. Their voices, we know many things about what women did. A lot of them have no name. Their women's voices, if they were strong and powerful, as I happen to think they were seen as threats, and they were somehow erased. And so when you talk about taking scripture and taking the context in which we live, or life, and trying to have a conversation between the two, I'm a little wary sometimes about the texts and the interpretation of the texts, because so few women's voices and perspectives are in those texts.
Well, I like David's opinion the first time he said, just turn the page.
Yeah. But again, I think, going back to Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, who wrote this groundbreaking work in memory of her. And looking at the Gospels, the early part of the tradition, women are interwoven in this. And you see it in Paul too. And I've tried to, in a recent book, document what happens to Paul's legacy. Yeah, he has a couple things in 1 Corinthians that, dodgy. Some have thought they were later additions. But I don't think Paul wrote 1 Timothy, as I said the other session. And what you begin to see is a conservative movement with regard to women and gender as you get into the second and third generations of the church. Now, there are some other voices there when you get into the fourth and fifth generations of the church. You can think about Thecla, for example. There's a Bishop Methodius who takes the Platonic, erotic symposium and turns it on its head and has all these women speaking not about erotic kinds of things, but about celibate kinds of things. And the whole movement towards celibacy. And of course, ultimately monasticism and so on and so forth. There are many, I think, I mean, we talk about this, so many strands woven into that. And I don't obviously disagree with the point you're making. David.
But the problem is that taking a broad stroke, a 12-inch brush to a half-inch brush, it's ruined the relationship with leadership of women for the entire Christian community. And it's left a mark to the entire feminist world. When I was coming of age in the Bronx, I was a good relationship with a student at Union Seminary getting her PhD. And we were talking about the use of language. That was early on. I mean, we're so far beyond that. And I said, well, what are we supposed to do? She says, well, if you're going to use one male image, use 7 female images just to pay your debt. So it's that we've lost so much because we've been on.
Right. That conservative movement in the second generation of the church and on has left. We've still never recovered from that. And I don't like the idea of progress, but we're not back there completely either. We've learned a couple of things along the way, maybe. And it's never just a straight line. 3 steps forward and a couple back, and it's different over here than it is over there. Gary?
You said we have learned a few things along the way. I'm wondering who the we is looking at Christianity as people call themselves in the United States. So we have learned things as
Well,
why.
yeah.
There's more regression almost after the fundamental.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I kind of agree with Barack Obama's The Arc of History. He's not the one who came up with that, but the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. I'd like to believe that, and that we are part of that. But the forces the impressive and good forces, at least in my frame of reference, do have their opponent. That all has its opponents.
But, you know, I should say one thing, because Julie mentioned this idea of their reluctance to use the language of kingdom. So I did some work this past week, and John Dominic Croissant does a little evaluation of the word malkut. Malkut is Hebrew, malkut Bey is Aramaic, and Basadeo is Greek. All feminine roots.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so we translated the feminine into a masculine root. So just that whole spin is very
Yeah.
interesting.
I'm not sure I want a queen any more than a king, actually, but, you know, but it's right.
It's not about queen, it's about kin, that we are all part of a kingdom, that is not about gender.
Well, yeah, but there's an authority structure when we use monarchical language, too, that I'm not sure so, after last time, it occurred to me, use realm, use it in the feminine or whatever, masculine. As far as I'm concerned, we could use X and Y.
Oh, no,
You are,
can't
though.
use that.
Huh?
You are.
Well, but there's a polarity, not about male, not, it's,
Sex and Y.
Chromosomes, X and Y.
I mean, I'm not referring to gender in that, I'm thinking about realms.
Right.
Yeah. Instead of kingdom. Realm, A and B, you know, whatever.
A lot of people use kingdom.
That's interesting.
Our
Yeah,
pastor
yeah.
in Portland uses the word kingdom. The bishop uses, many people I know use kingdom.
I was confirmed by Pastor Kingdom. His daughter happens to attend church here. Okay. Again, this spills over into this whole business of questions and answers, and we've been around that maypole quite a bit, right? Linda?
I don't know if we have any psychologists on this, but,
Professional psychologists?
yeah, what is there has to be some sort of psychological something that makes us all want to stay, here I stand. Here is how I differentiate myself from the.
Here I stand, I can do no other. We've heard that one before, right?
But when you think, grow a church in particular, but all kinds of other groups, and it won't take very long for somebody in that group to say, well, I disagree, I'm different, and to build some sort of structure and carry off part of the group. It seems animalistic almost. But
Yeah.
it certainly is a feature of human behavior.
I can't claim to be a French structuralist. And I don't know if you're familiar with all this, but, you know, in my innards somewhere, I'm a bit of a structuralist. We understand this in relationship to difference, the difference of that. And, you know, the French went on, then they became, the movement was post-structuralism, and then modernism, and so on and so forth. But, and I kind of there was a period of my career when I was really thinking about linguistics. I think I mentioned that to you before. Meanings of words generate relative to some sort of structural opposite. And we wouldn't know what, I'm just dragging this up, what light was without knowing darkness. It would make no sense. Now, I don't know how far I want to go down that structuralist way, because I think when you get to human sexuality and gender, we've learned it's a little more complicated than just this and or that. But there is something psychological and maybe even structural in the way we develop language and semantics and meaning and all of that, where things are relative to each other. Meaning comes out of that kind of a polarity, if you will.
It seems to me that we live in a community or a culture where everything is so competitive. When you talk about light versus darkness or whatever, light has a lot of qualities. We could talk about light's qualities without mentioning the word darkness if we wanted to. But we want to make sure that light is up here and dark is down here, or white is up here and people of color are down here.
Heaven or hell, or
Exactly.
Yeah, of course, we get into this because we've naturally learned a language. We're sort of enculturated into it in some sense, and then we think from that further from that point on. If we could had time to just think about that, it would.
I think what I'm trying to say is that getting people to agree, getting people to identify what we have in common is somehow related to this other phenomenon, which is people defining themselves by how they disagree.
Yeah, and I've sometimes thought, when it comes to religion, Christianity in this country, the truth is determined by how vehement somebody expresses it. And the more vehement you are in the expression of your sense of the truth, that somehow validates it as being more true than something else.
And more people follow.
Yes, and then you get the herd mentality and you get all of that kind of stuff going on.
I just get the giggles.
Huh?
I just get the giggles.
Vehemence is no testimony to the truthfulness of anything except maybe your own anger or vehemence. What do you think about this business of the singularity of truth and the plurality of truth in these matters? Now, I think it's a little different when you get into mathematics. Maybe theoretical mathematics, not so much, but basic. The logical language of the sciences is at least arithmetic and probably mathematics. That's different than when you get into the realm of theology and philosophy, ... I think we can say that certain theological ideas, maybe certain philosophical ideas as well, if we look at history, are more apt to have salutary and positive consequences than other things. And that's the historian coming out in me, that we can look at certain theological ideas that over time have shown themselves to have consequences that I would not want to affirm. So, if we ask questions about truth or plurality from the point of view of a kind of consequentialist ethic, is this apt? If we take this idea and we act on this idea, are we more apt, not necessarily guaranteed, but are we more apt to have a healthy, social and religious posture that bears testimony, in our case, to the gospel message, then if we take this idea, which has shown itself, just pull something out of a hat, to be anti-Judaistic and probably anti-Semitic. And the consequence has been to ghettoize Jews in Europe. You can walk a 10-minute walk from the train station in Venice, and you get to what is built to be the oldest Jewish ghetto in Europe, and the synagogues in there have been reconstructed, and so on and so forth. And there were certain Jews that were important to the kings because they had money. But you get to the mid part of the 20th century, and it all comes to a head with a great deal of complicity of most Christians. Not all, but most. And can we learn anything from that Matthean text? The Jewish crowd in Jerusalem yells, "Crucify him, crucify him. His blood be upon the generations of us." Take that literally for you, and you may have a pretty straight line when the circumstances are right to the 20th century.
They were also being trained, like we are being trained from our administration, through the plethora of lies and myths.
Oh, yeah.
The Third Reich did that to convince, so I'm not apologizing for the Christian
Complicity. Mm-hmm.
But I am recognizing that we share cultural nuance here.
Exactly right, David. Exactly right. But it lays upon us the responsibility of whatever our circumstances may be, to have a critical judgment about our world and ourselves in it, and at least have a modicum of humility about our way of weaving through ourselves through the thicket.
And to add to what you just said, David, I've talked to several people, most of them older than I am, in the last week since Netanyahu was on 60 Minutes, and they just were like, I couldn't stand to watch it, I'd turn them off. I can't stand them, I have to turn it off. And I mean, that's so polarizing, and I'm just like, well, you can't, I don't think you can just ignore it or turn it off, but it's feeding into that, what you were saying about, well, I can't think of the word I want to use, but the lies they're telling,
Yeah.
I thought the best movie on TV, on one of the streaming stations called The Swedish Connection. Have you seen it?
No.
Sweden was the only
Swedish
country,
Connection.
the only Scandinavian country that was not occupied by the Nazis during World War II.
And they saved many
Many
Jews.
people. And it just is an amazing story. British diplomat, or whoever it was trying to justify that they should do nothing so the Nazis would not attack them and take over their country. He goes, well, look at what the Americans are doing. They're just delaying. They're the Americans, the United States is getting the applications for people to immigrate, and instead of denying it, they're just putting it in the policy.
Yeah.
Until it all goes away. And to have to understand that as a country, that's what we did. It's just awful.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so how is that any different from kind of what's going on with the immigration stuff here now? It's not. I mean, it's really not. I'm so ashamed. I have to say, Eric and I were talking today about patriots. So, I mean, I am proud of my country, and I'm happy and thankful to be an American, but I am not proud of my government right now, and I am not proud at all of who's leading our country and who says they stand for me, because they don't stand for me at all.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And even the word patriot,
That seems to be a buzzword right now, is what came out.
and it's one of those words that has meanings that far exceed being, I'm glad to have been born in this country, I love this country, I am happy about being an American, but I am horrified right now by being an American around the world. It's a horrific, a horrific lens that just has decimated our role as peacekeepers or as a democracy.
Right.
It's hard to judge those we don't completely know. I mean, to say, hey, patriots are there,
Yeah.
I think it's a little deeper than what we may
Yeah.
view.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But getting to your understanding, though, of knowing the truth and having that conviction, going back to the narrative, the biblical narrative, the story of Jesus praying for us, John 17, I guess it's coming up next week or something.
Yeah, this Sunday.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Verses 1 through 11.
Okay. But they will know the truth.
And the truth will.
And we emphasize truth versus knowing. Knowing is a relationship. Truth is an ideology of some sort or something else.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't get the truth until you have a relationship.
Yeah.
And will implies that it's a continuum.
Yeah. Well, at least for myself, when I use the word truth in the sense of a conviction I may have, it's always now thought of as provisional. I could be wrong.
Well, it's like Linda said, here I stand, but I have 2 ears to hear.
Here I stand and I will stand here, but I could be wrong. Yeah. No, I mean, history, I think, does caution us about absolute certainty again. This business of a confessional church, a dogmatic church or not a dogmatic church, and I know this is overly simplistic, but, and it comes back, Judy, you're thinking about the creeds. I think a vibrant confessional church is always confessing, looking back, looking to the present, looking to the future in an open-ended way, not in a closed, extremely dogmatic way. I think history teaches this. You know, it may not be so bad to wear lipstick and a few other things, you know. Play cards, dance. Probably heard me say, you know, the joke at Concordia.
Now we're all curious.
Oh, yeah, you know, I was at Concordia when we were moving beyond a lot of the traditions. You know, we still had lingonberries at Christmas and a few things like that left out. But, you know, the reason why Concordia Lutherans were opposed to sex, it may lead to dancing.
Anytime.
It may lead to dancing. You know? Well, you know, it's kind of humorous, but there was something underneath all that too in the day. But I'm using the word dogmatic not necessarily the way a systematic theologian would use it. I'm using it in a negative sense. That the truth in all its parts has been revealed once for all, and it probably is found in the King James Version. Of course, it wasn't translated until 1611, but this is it. Well, and you've heard me say this before, I'm sure, when I would talk to young Concordia students and talk to them about Paul and his notions of righteousness and faith and works and so on and so forth, and his own sense of this abiding guilt, I was, and I think the students were, amazed at how different their context, their view of the world is as compared to Luther 500 years earlier. Now, if you're going to proclaim and teach and confess the gospel in some sense, in a meaningful way, you can't assume that 21st century people are asking the same kinds of questions or having the same kinds of turmoils and torments that Luther did in the 16th century, and have any of this ring true or make sense to contemporary people. So we need to translate, think it through. And here we come back to the whole question again of the contemporary context and where people are. You can't, the old saying is, you can't just preach the 16th century louder and pound the pulpit harder and assume everybody's going to get it then. It doesn't work that way. Okay. What I want to do is just switch gears pretty dramatically about this, I think, and give you this, in a little more formal way, this piece on city building and the benefits of Babel, conversing with a biblical text. Genesis 11. I'll just read a few verses. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as they migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with the top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Now, that text goes on a little further. I'm not going to take time to read it further. The Tower of Babel story is one of those provocative legends in our tradition that at the very least is perplexing and filled with irony. Imagine humanity in the Middle East settling in a particular corner of the earth and there setting about to build a city with its tower reaching to the heights of heaven. And imagine God apparently concerned that human beings will be able to do anything that they propose, resolving to confuse their language and scatter them abroad in the land. The images in this text are as vivid as they are unsettling. The images of this story can be seen as metaphors for the great human project of city building. It is a story about the human quest to shape, to control, and to understand the world, to protect humanity from the brutish forces that would seek to destroy society. It is about the quest. It is about the quest to resist the forces that would drive us back to the caves of the Stone Age. In short, this is a story of building the city. On the empty and formless plains, humanity seeks to live its imprint through technology and through, I would suggest, economic development to build the city. In the narrowness of the mind, humanity seeks to create a global view of reality to build the city. In the provincial lives of men and women, humanity seeks to find hope for the world to build the city. In procreation, humanity attempts to perpetuate itself, and in the despair of loneliness and in isolation, humanity strives to form relationships and develop webs of interdependence to build the city. The quest to become educated human beings is, in its own way, part of the enterprise of city building. We seek to learn the common language of reason and critical thought. We strive to learn the language of the city, the language that prevails over the din of competing sounds. The rattle and the babble of dissonant sounds are all around us. The forces of chaos lap at the gate. They lap at the gate of the human city as we seek to build ever higher the tower of the city. Our aspiration to build is driven as much by fear as it is by the lure of knowledge, truth, and commonality. What would happen to us if the city should cease to be a possibility? Would we wander the land threatened by nature, struggling to survive, living in prehistoric caves? Driven by fear, we build and we build again, seeking to hold at bay the prospect that we might be dragged into the primeval state of vulnerability and self-destruction. On the plains of ancient Babylon, ironically enough, the bodies of the dead destroyed by insidious chemicals, lie frozen in their tracks, and humanity is in fear, gathers to build a city as a defense against chaos. Among the rubble-strewn hills of Ukraine, Gaza, and many other places, humanity is reminded again of the threat to the city and of its own vulnerability. More than compassion is at stake here. The human project of constructing the world is shown to be threatened by forces out of our control. The city builders must join together, if only for a few moments, and we wonder if perhaps the one city with its common language and few words has been achieved once again. Perhaps indeed we are one people with one language. Perhaps we can understand one another's speech. Maybe our divisions have been set aside. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the whole earth. What could God have been doing? Was God threatened by the prospect that the people might succeed? Was God being meddlesome or vindictive? Was God not violating something that is desirable and good? Oneness, wholeness, commonality? It is precisely here that the text is perhaps most perplexing. The great project of building the city, which in many ways seems good and proper, collides with the activity of a God who seems to be fearful of the people's very success. Perhaps God knows something about the project itself. It may be that the universal language which makes the building of the city possible also sows the seeds of the horror of the city. For where there is a single language, a single grammar, the possibility of knowing when one is in error is precluded. While a common language may be useful in enabling us to say, "Come, let us build," it does not help us in knowing what we ought to build. When the universal language of physics or of artificial intelligence is the only language the city knows, humanity builds its tower to the heavens without being able to discern why it builds. When the only language that the city knows is the language of profit and loss, it becomes impossible to know the moral implications of poverty and despair. When the only grammar of the city is its material success, it becomes impossible to see that excess has become its own justification. And when the only language of the city is prescribed by ideology, the city all too often lapses into authoritarianism. Perhaps, just perhaps, God knows that in confusing the language of the people, the project of city building is preserved from its own destructiveness. Humanity's building of the city and God's confusing of the language are somehow at odds in our mind. But perhaps, just perhaps, God knows that when there is only one way, one language, the distinction between truth and error can no longer be perceived. The story cautions us about a common religious language in the city. When all the city uses a single theological grammar, the possibility of speaking about God and of God ceases. For then our notion of God is limited to the single language of the city. The possibility of knowing God ceases, for we have lost the capacity to discern idolatry. We have lost the capacity to discern the truth. Knowing God and discerning truth are dependent upon hearing, perhaps even speaking, more than one language of God. When all the city uses a single religious language and recites from a common theological grammar, it is then time for God to come into the city again and confuse the language and scatter us abroad in the land. Not to destroy us, but to enable us to escape the horrors, to escape the horrors of our own destructiveness. Not to drive us from God, but to make knowing God possible. Not to reduce the glory of God, but to proclaim once again the majesty of God in all the land. Let's take a few moments and hear the sounds of silence. The sounds of silence. Thank you for coming.